Hello, and welcome to Show Me History. I'm your host, Amy Blankenship. When we think of the American Revolutionary War, we tend to think of the eastern states, New England. But portions of the continent beyond that played a vital role as well. The Battle of St. Louis was the westernmost battle of the Revolutionary War and proved to be a pivotal battle. Fought on May 26, 1870, the Battle of St. Louis is also sometimes referred to as the Battle of Fort San Carlos. To tell the story of the Battle of St. Louis, I need to address some prior history of the parties involved. The Spanish, Great Britain, France, Native Americans, and the newly formed colonies of the Americas. The French and Indian War raged from 1754 to 1763. During this time, France gave its territory west of the Mississippi to the Spanish in a secret treaty. At the end of the war in 1763, via the Treaty of Paris, France granted land east of the Mississippi to Great Britain. The British Parliament imposed a multitude of taxes on those living in the 13 colonies to recoup cost. As citizens of the empire, British government thought they had the right to tax colonies. Obviously, the colonists did not view this as fair since they had no direct representation in Parliament. The next several years, the colonists saw an ever-increasing number of taxes and restrictive controls placed on them. Several skirmishes occurred, including the Boston Tea Party. The first official battle in the War of Colonists versus Great Britain occurred on April 19, 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. As the war raged on, colonists created their own forms of government and voted to officially declare independence from Great Britain on July 4, 1776. The war raged on further. On February 6, 1778, the newly created United States and France signed two treaties uniting them in battle. The Spanish joined the American Revolutionary War by declaring war on Great Britain on June 6, 1779. Although they had been helping the French and Americans for quite some time, supplying money, weapons, gunpowder, and other supplies. The American colonists now saw France and Spain fighting on their side. Great Britain was facing not just a bunch of writing colonists, but also a global conflict. Now let's take a little side trip and talk about a young man named George Rogers Clark. Hailing from Virginia, he traveled west at the age of 19, hoping to find better land. Britain thought that all the land west of the Mississippi belonged to them, so they recruited Native Americans to attack men who tried to establish homesteads. Clark was having none of this. He formed a militia to defend himself and his land. Governor Patrick Henry heard of this and sent Clark on a secret mission to seize more British land. Clark was successful and took over land in southern Illinois and southern Indiana. He captured many a village and outpost, including Cahokia. In response to Clark conquering the Illinois country, and Spain entering the war helping to smuggle goods up the Mississippi, Lord George Germain of the British forces devised a plan to conquer the Mississippi River Valley. They would attack posts on either sides of the river, St. Louis and Cahokia, but the British needed more manpower and supplies to fight any battle on the Western Front. Emanuel Hesse oversaw the Western campaign for the British. He was given the rank of captain and assigned to recruit Native Americans to help fight and gather supplies for posts along the Mississippi River. He recruited Native Americans from the Great Lakes area that disliked French colonists with promises of weapons, riches, and alliances. He also had a following of Canadian fur trappers. Hesse promised exclusive trading rights on the western side of the Mississippi when the British won the war. Each man fighting for the British was given a red coat and firearms. Starting in Detroit and Mackinac, Hesse got to work gathering men and supplies and heading south to St. Louis. By April 1780, the group had reached Prairie du Chien in Iowa and were joined by additional Native Americans, including members of the Sioux, Fox, Chippewa, Waukesha, Winnebago, and Sauk tribes. Their objection would be to capture St. Louis for the British and have total control over the Mississippi. Hesse would stay in town and plunder the city of money, furs, property, and ammunition. The rest of the group would proceed on to Natchez. On their way, they would stop at St. Genevieve and attack Kaskaskia. On May 2nd, the group left their encampment and headed south. They still had 450 miles before they reached St. Louis. Let's leave Hesse and his men for a bit and see what's going on in St. Louis. At the time of the battle, St. Louis was a small village With a population of about 700, it was 1 mile long and 3 blocks deep. Primitive homes and buildings speckled the landscape. Further from town were the common open grounds, fields and forests for the residents to farm and hunt. The city was in its infancy, and so was its government. Mainly a fur trading post, it was governed by Lieutenant Governor Fernando de Leyva of the Spanish Army. He was disliked by St. Louisans. He was standoffish and difficult to approach. An extremely strict and by-the-books man, he thought St. Louis was immoral, and St. Louis was set in her ways and did not like the changes that he made. Leyva had orders to cooperate with the Americans and assist George Rogers Clark with men and supplies. Upon Leyva's arrival in St. Louis, the village was undefended. It only had small wooden fences around houses and gardens to keep out animals. On March 17, 1780, Leyva was warned of a plan to attack St. Louis, and he began preparations to defend the village. Lorna Onelay canoed 60 miles south of the Mississippi to spread the warning. Her family owned a trading post north of St. Louis and heard Native American traders talking about the British plans to attack the posts down the river. Leyva began preparations for defense. All men 15 to 50 of age were required to be part of the militia. He ordered the construction of a defense tower on the highest part of the city, so basically located at today's Busch Stadium. The original plan was to build 4 towers, but Leyva had paid for 40% of the initial construction himself, and there's very few remaining funds. The one tower lay on the western edge of the village on a hill behind the church. Father Bernard blessed the first stone and named it Fort San Carlos in honor of the King of Spain, Carlos III. Although exact dimensions are unknown, it is thought to have been 30 feet in diameter and 30 to 40 feet high. Constructed of limestone, it only took 39 days to build. Cannons from an old fort upriver replaced atop Fort San Carlos. The next step in creating the line of defense was making an entrenchment around the city. They did not have time to construct a stone wall or wooden palisade, so the villagers of St. Louis dug dirt and piled it up on the side facing away from the city. 750 yards of trench were dug from the tower to the north of town, and 1,250 yards were dug in the southern direction. They created makeshift gates at the entrances to the city. Leyva sent a request to the village of St. Genevieve for additional men to help defend St. Louis. Francois Vale sent an additional 65 militiamen. Now St. Louis had about 200 men ready to fight. Leyva banned all hunting parties and decreed that men were not permitted to leave the city. In further preparation for the upcoming battle, men were assigned specific locations along the entrenchment circling St. Louis. Cannon fire, or the bell of the church, would signal the start of the battle, and men were to report to their stations immediately. Each man was given a firearm and plenty of ammunition. The villagers stocked up on food and water. Cannons were prepared and ready to fire. Steps were taken to protect boats and canoes on the waterfront. A scouting party was dispatched from St. Louis on May 23rd. The enemy was spotted 70 miles away. On May 24th, Hess's forces were 14 miles north of St. Louis. This motley crew contained nearly 1,000 people. It was a mix of British officers, Canadian fur trappers, and some 900 Native Americans, some of which were at war with each other. Those fighting for the village of St. Louis would be outnumbered 3 to 1. On May 25th, the British forces sent out a group of men on a recon mission to see what they could learn about the village. Being May 25th, the Thursday after Trinity Sunday, it was the Feast of Corpus Christi. St. Louis was observing the celebration in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. The Feast of Corpus Christi consisted of Mass, a procession followed by a benediction. It was also customary to decorate homes in the procession route with flowers. When the British scouts arrived, villagers of St. Louis were out in the commons picking strawberries and flowers for the afternoon festivities. This proved to be at their advantage. The scouts could not get close enough to the actual village without being spotted by those in the field. Blocked by crops, they could not see the entrenchment around the village, nor the defense tower. And if they did see the tower, they probably mistook it as a windmill. The men returned to camp without much information, but decided to attack the following day. The next day started as normal. The people of St. Louis went to work in the fields and opened their shops. At 1 in the afternoon, the British and their entourage arrived. Men rushed from the woods towards the village, showering the commons with a scent of bullets and arrows. As they made their way through the commons, they captured or killed anyone working out in the fields. The militia of St. Louis was alerted of the attack by the ringing of the church bells and took their stations along the entrenchment and tower. Side note, the bell used to signal the start of the battle still exists. The British began torturing the captives from the field, but Leyba knew this was a plan to draw the men out of the village out into the open. He forbade anyone from leaving. The women and children of the town were gathered in the governor's house and placed under guard. The battle lasted 2 hours instead of days as anticipated by the British. They had planned to suppress the village by depleting food and ammunition supplies until the village surrendered. The British forces were an unorganized mess. At the first cannon fire, the Sauk and Fox tribes defected. They thought it would be easy to take over the village and didn't expect such warfare. The remaining tribes continued to attack with guns and arrows in groups. Instead of fighting as one cohesive group, they took turns attacking their post. A weak spot was found in the entrenchment, and the British prepared to storm the line, but some of the Native American tribes began to retreat. This caused chaos, and the attackers stopped. The remaining tribes thought that the retreaters were coming back to attack them. As the British troops, Canadian fur trappers, and Native American tribes left the battle scene, they burned crops, livestock, and outbuildings on their exit north. Leyba sent out a few men to survey the area. The enemy had left, and St. Louis had won the battle. But Leyba was not fully convinced that the coast was clear, and required all men to stay on ground for a few days. No one was allowed to go past the entrenchment, not even to survey the damage and collect bodies of those who had fallen in the common fields. St. Louis lost 7% of its population, with 21 people killed, while 7 were wounded and 25 taken prisoner. At the same time as the Battle of St. Louis, the village of Cahokia in Illinois Territory was also under attack. George Rogers Clark had arrived the previous day and brought additional forces to help defend. 250 militiamen would defend Cahokia against the British group. The fight occurred on the mission property, holding a large stone house and other miscellaneous buildings, all protected by a palisade. That battle only lasted an hour or so, and as the case of St. Louis, the enemy had not expected a fortified city and thought it would be much easier to conquer. The people of Cahokia used the stone house as a means of defense. Some were stationed inside and shot their rifles out of the windows towards the enemy. The attackers could not break the line of defense, and they quickly retreated. As they left, they also killed livestock and set fire to crops. The Cahokia men suffered minor casualties. 5 were killed and 4 captured, and an unknown number were injured. May 26, 1780 was not the best day for the British forces and their allies. Our story hasn't quite ended yet. A few months after the battle, the Spanish militia from St. Louis joined forces with George Rogers Clark to seek revenge. A total of 350 men headed north. They came across the main village of the Sauk and Fox tribes. At that time, the village was empty, so Clark and the other men in the company burned it to the ground. They also left a threatening note that they would return with more men. A short while after this episode, the leaders of the tribes arrived peacefully in St. Louis. They surrendered British flags and medals given to them by the British Army. The people of the Mississippi River Valley knew another attack from the British forces was possible. They created an advanced system of warning posts that stayed in place until at least 1783. By 1818, Fort Carlos had been torn down. A historical marker is on the site of the battle, near the corner of Walnut and Broadway, downtown, just outside the Hilton Ballpark Village. The plaque was donated in 1946 by the General Society, Sons of the Revolution. It reads, quote, "Near this spot stood Fort San Carlos, erected in 1780. It was attacked May 1780 by the British and Indians and successfully defended by the Spanish garrison under Captain Fernando de Leyba. The victory prevented Great Britain from gaining control of the Mississippi Valley in the later years of the American Revolutionary War." End quote. Each year, the Commemorative Committee for the Battle of Fort San Carlos holds a tribute service to honor those who died in the fight. During the ceremony, they read aloud the list of 21 villagers who had died during the battle. The Battle of St. Louis was pivotal in the American Revolutionary War. Some say it was the most significant and underrated. It reshaped the future of our city and perhaps all of the West. Led by the British but fought by Native Americans, it was the only battle in which all 5 fronts fought. As one of the most significant battles, it is the reason St. Louis is part of the United States and not Canada or Great Britain. Thank you for joining me today. You can find me at the website showmehistorystl.com, on Twitter at showme_history, and on Facebook at showmehistorystl. Until next time, I'll see you in the loo.